All right, nice job making it through 1A. Let's move on to 1B. So we've got an algebraic expression here that we're going to talk about, and we're going to apply some of that vocabulary and operation words that we've already looked at in 1A to 1B, where we look at it a little more closely. So this first question says, how many terms are in the expression? There are 3, because remember, terms are separated by addition and subtraction signs. So when I look, 2x is multiplication because I'm doing 2 times x. So that is one whole term. But then I see a plus sign, so that separates it between the next term, which is y. And then I've got a subtraction sign to separate from the next term, which is 4. So I've got 1, 2, 3 terms. Okay? Then they ask, list all the variables. Well, the variables are the letters that are representing an unknown number. And so that's pretty easy, is to look at the letters. X, y. X and y are our variables. Now here's the part that's just a tad more tricky. The coefficients are the numbers being multiplied to a variable. So if there's a variable, there has to be a coefficient. That's a part of the name, is that it's the number being multiplied to a variable. So if you see a variable, there is always a coefficient. So the 2 is pretty easy to pick out because 2 is being multiplied to x, 2x, or 2 times x. But the one that's a little harder to tell is y. The coefficient for that is 1 because you have to have at least one y for it to even exist. Some people might think that the coefficient is 0. That is not true. If it's 0, that means there's no variable at all, because 0 times y would just be 0. But if you do 1 times y, it would give you y, just like how 1 times 5 would give you 5. So whenever you see a variable, there is always a coefficient. It's either the number that you see in front of it, or it's a sneaky hiding 1 that is actually there, but we just don't always write it because it's kind of redundant to write it, okay? So if you see a variable, there's always a coefficient, either the number you see or 1, okay? So 2 and 1 are our coefficients. Then it says to circle the constant. See if you can try that on your own. And 4, that is our constant. Okay, so that minus 4 is our constant. There is no variable with it, so it is just a constant. Okay, all right, moving on, this is a numerical expression we're going to look at. And we're going to look at the parts using some of those operation words. So it says, what part of the expression represents the product? So when we look at this, there's several different pieces to this expression. We want to only focus on the part that represents the product, which means multiplication that we just learned in 1A. So when I look at that, 8 times 4 is the part that represents the product, because 8 times 4 times, or multiplication, is the product. And that is the only part that represents the product. The 2 minus is not a part of the product. Okay? The next question says, what part of the expression represents the difference? So now difference means subtraction. So when I break this expression down, I see that 2 minus 8 is the difference. However, you could also think of it as 2 minus 32, because if you do 8 times 4, you would get 32. But if I'm looking at it as an individual part of the expression, I really want to focus on the 2 minus 8 part. So that's really what I would prefer, but you are technically right if you say 2 minus 32. Okay? The last part is a little tricky. It says, what are the factors in the expression? We have talked about factors before, but to refresh your memory, these are the numbers that you multiply together. And I want to back up real quick to our last example here. So, for example, if I was going to list the factors in this problem, or this expression, I would have 2 and x as factors because I'm doing 2 times x. So 2 and x would be factors, but also 1 and y would be factors because I'm really doing 1 and y. I know you don't see the 1 here, and if that bothers you, you can always write in a 1 in front of it. That's your choice. But it's really 1 times y, which is why we end up with just y. So 1 and y would be the factors. So I'd have 2 and x as the factors, and 1 and y as the factors. So now when I'm thinking about that with this expression, 8 and 4 are the factors because those are the numbers being multiplied. 8 and 4. So I wouldn't write it as 8 times 4 the way I did up here because that was representing the product. I want to know the individual factors, so 8 and 4. Okay? All right, you have a quick check to go ahead and grab from me. And then moving on to 1C. If you need to go back and look at something, feel free. You got it.